The Epstein files, they're not really old news about one man's crimes. What they are is a consolidated official record of institutional failure. This explainer is going to focus on what that record tells us about the systems of power that allowed this harm to go on for years, long after the facts were already known.
And that right there is the central, unavoidable truth of this entire archive. The files don't reveal a lack of information. What they reveal is a profound lack of resolve. The story here isn't some great mystery that needed solving. It's about what happens when the truth is simply inconvenient. So, let's be perfectly clear about our focus here. We are not here to relitigate the actions of Jeffrey Epstein. He's gone. But the systems that protected him, the patterns of behavior that enabled him, well, they're still very much with us. And that is what we have to understand. To really grasp the anatomy of this failure, we first have to get our heads around the sheer scale of the evidence that's been made public. We're talking about over 3.5 million files. That includes documents, more than 180,000 images, and around 2,000 videos. This isn't just a handful of court records. It is a massive, comprehensive digital record of an entire operation, and crucially, the institutional response to it. So, you might be asking, why do we have all this now? Well, it's because Congress passed a law that essentially forced the Department of Justice to open its books. The stated goal was transparency, right? A way to finally provide some answers. But what happens when the way you create transparency ends up creating its own set of problems? And this brings us from that abstract idea of transparency to its very real, very human consequences, especially for the survivors. Now, the intent of the laws seemed clear: shed light on everything for the benefit of the victims and for the public's trust. It was supposed to be a real step towards accountability. But then you hear this from a victim's attorney, and it just stops you in your tracks. It points to this profound, catastrophic failure in the release process itself, where the very people the law was designed to protect were, in some cases, exposed even further. The system, in effect, chose to protect others. This gets us to a crucial point. The problems we're seeing weren't just random accidents or a few isolated mistakes. They were the direct result of deliberate decisions made inside of flawed systems. Let's look at one specific documented example. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the cover of the official report from the Department of Justice's own watchdog. This was the investigation into Epstein's death in federal custody. It's a formal, documented look at a catastrophic institutional breakdown. And the findings? Well, they paint a crystal clear picture. The Inspector General found a total collapse of basic fundamental procedures. Mandatory checks weren't done. Official policies widely ignored. A direct instruction to give him a cellmate? Nope, not followed. And the security cameras? Well, they somehow weren't recording properly. This wasn't just one error, it was a total system failure. But these failures didn't just pop up in 2019. Not even close. To really understand the root of all this, we have to go back more than a decade to a single legal decision that set the course for everything that followed. Just look at this timeline for a second. In 2007, federal prosecutors had a case so strong they drafted a 60-count indictment. The potential consequences were severe, but by 2008, that was all gone, replaced by a plea deal that has been widely criticized ever since. That moment sent a signal, loud and clear. For the wealthy and the connected, accountability was something you could negotiate. And that, of course, brings us to the network. The files are filled with influential names, but the important question isn't just who knew him, but rather what was the function of that proximity to power. So the crucial point is this: the network's power wasn't necessarily about some mass conspiracy. It was in creating social cover. It normalized him. It created an environment where people just assumed that if something were truly wrong, another more important person would surely step in. It created a kind of collective indifference. Which leads us to today. The very existence of this massive, chaotic archive now presents a test for all of our institutions. Let's be honest, just dumping 3.5 million files online is not accountability. In fact, you could argue it does the opposite. It shifts the immense, almost impossible burden of making sense of it all, from the Department of Justice to the public, to journalists, and to survivors. It creates confusion through sheer volume, and it allows institutions to claim transparency without actually providing any real clarity.
And that's because Epstein's death didn't solve the problem. These patterns, the ones exposed by the files, are still active in our systems. We still see this deference to wealth, the marginalization of victims whose stories are inconvenient, and a justice system that sometimes seems more focused on managing reputations than delivering real accountability. And that leaves those in power with a fundamental choice. Are these files going to be treated as a historical archive, a closed case about one bad guy, or as living evidence of a system that still needs fundamental reform? Is this an aberration, or is it a warning?
Ultimately, the files show us a chilling truth. Systemic harm doesn't require chaos. It can persist through the quiet, orderly decisions of people who believe they're just being prudent, managing risk, and protecting their institutions. The record is now public. The question isn't what happened anymore. The question is, what are we going to choose to do with what we know?